The Quinn administration faces investigations, and voters might get to decide on term limits. We'll talk about it next on Capitol View. Welcome to Capitol View, the program where we talk about state issues, sometimes federal issues, and how they just might affect your life. I'm Bernie Schoenburg from the State Journal-Register here in Springfield. With me today, it's been a busy time. The legislature's back. Spring session is going full bore, and so is the campaign for governor and other things. Bob Gough is back, editor of QuincyJournal.com. Thanks for making the drive over to the state capitol.
Thanks, Bernie.
And Bruce Rushton is here, reporter in Springfield for Illinois Times.
Nice
the
to be
feisty weekly, if we can say that.
Thank you, you're too kind.
Okay, Quinn administration under investigation for a couple of things. One of them is the Neighborhood Recovery Initiative. Chicago Sun-Times has been pretty strong on this story. What we have found out is not only is Cook County State's Attorney Anita Alvarez looking into this, but also there's some federal prosecutors looking into this program, which was more than $50 million given out to basically just before the 2010 election, where Pat Quinn was in a close race. And there's questions about where some of this money went, which was supposed to go to neighborhoods of Chicago to fight crime. Bruce, where are we on this? And what do these investigations mean? Do we think there's a problem here?
I think there's a problem here, Houston. I mean, what we've got here is
We don't mean the mayor of Springfield.
I do not mean the mayor of Springfield. Right. What we've got here is, it's a $50 million problem for Quinn. And I don't see how we can shake this in time for Election Day. I mean, federal prosecutors do not move at lightning speed, nor do, frankly, state prosecutors. You got both at play here. So this is going to be a drumbeat, I think, that's still going to be going on come November. And Quinn so far hasn't been able, I think, to come up with any good answers on this. I think his most laughable explanation is, well, this isn't political at all. The money didn't arrive until after Election Day. Well, you know, it was in the mail, and everybody knew it. And so his one response that it isn't really political because the money had not arrived before Election Day, that it's beyond laughable. It's specious. And so I don't see these, if that's the best response he can come up with, he's got some trouble on his hands.
Well, I think this is tailor-made for the Rauner campaign. With his seemingly unlimited war chest. The fact, as Bruce pointed out, this investigation is not going to end anytime soon. It just gives Rauner a whole new strain of campaign ads to go into. You and I were talking before the show. He's already started his corruption hotline, and so this is just another thing to pour into that. And I think it's big trouble for the governor.
The other thing, I guess, to note, that I wonder about, and it was kind of a question in everybody's mind going into the primary, what's going to be pulled out against Rauner? And they had the nursing home thing. They had
he had invested in.
Correct.
Even though they changed companies, but there were
right.
more than $1 billion in judgments for bad care.
Sure. This alleged relationship between Stuart Levine, that was pulled out, didn't stick. And so maybe there's something else that we don't know about yet. But I would have thought that they pulled out everything they could find against Rauner, and so far that hasn't been proven effective. And so we've got these two things now: the NRI initiative and this IDOT scandal. I guess we can talk about.
Is the fact that there is Michael Shackman, who's a rather famous lawyer in Chicago because he won some anti-patronage rulings back even in the days of Mayor's Daily. Has said that way too many people at the Illinois Department of Transportation were hired not as civil servants, but under just free hire, as if they were a political hire, as if they were policymaking, even when many of them were not. So too many people were hired just at the whim of the administration, which means they could be considered patronage. And the Quinn administration, I believe, has said that they got so much stimulus money so fast from the federal government that they needed to hire people quickly to put programs in place, and so they didn't go through the rigmarole.
But we'll follow that out. The state is broke, and he's saying we have too much money, so we have to hire more people to handle it. I mean, that doesn't sing real well. I think that he's...
It takes somebody to design a bridge.
It takes somebody to design a bridge. I think that he's got, that's a little less problematic than the Neighborhood Recovery Initiative, in that for one thing, patronage has been going on for so long in the state of Illinois on every level, despite these court rulings, despite Shackman's actions in Cook County, despite Rutan, it has continued. And so I think that there's a certain amount of acceptance of that sort of thing amongst the electorate. So I don't think that's as damaging to him, frankly, as the Neighborhood Recovery Initiative. And he's also on the IDOT thing. He could potentially, I think, solve part of this for himself if he starts being really open about it. You know, okay, here's who got hired, here's why. The way to combat that thing is if in fact, it's a plausible explanation. I didn't mean to be too facetious there, but it's plausible that they had a whole bunch of money coming in and they needed to deal with it. Well, then illustrate that for the electorate. If you can actually illustrate that and make that make sense, then start doing it. But do it in excruciating detail, and you might be able to get out of the woods on that one.
But there's too many instances around the state, and I've talked to guys who work in District 6 offices where there will be a position that just magically opens up, and it will be a connected Democrat who gets that position. Well, then that connected Democrat goes away, and the position might sit vacant for 6 months, 18 months, 2 years. Then all of a sudden, another connected Democrat will magically shows up.
Stories about this in QuincyJournal.com?
We have alluded to that. Yes.
Yes. Let's have some specifics.
But there was a former employee who lost his job that we did report on for drunk driving. And he was a patronage employee, and he was gone, and that position sat vacant for months, and then we have just recently had some new hires over there. So that's been part of this. And you have to go back to, remember under Blagojevich when they had the IDOT offices taping local newscasts in order to track stories? I mean, this is just more of that. It's just not on such an incredibly blatant level. We've got them sending out news releases for community betterment programs and things like that. It's just things we haven't seen lately that we hadn't seen for a long time, but now have magically reappeared.
Interesting. Well, I will say that what the IDOT situation does just with employees hired who maybe should have been hired a different way or weren't classified correctly, Bruce Rauner has used that already when he was in Springfield this last week to link Quinn to Blagojevich. You can say that Blagojevich had problems with IDOT and now Quinn has problems with IDOT, and Quinn of course was Blagojevich's lieutenant governor, and Blagojevich, of course, is in prison. So this does play into the narrative of a Rauner. I will say, just because I like to give the other side that I saw, Governor Quinn appearing at the State House talking about student grants, college grants that he wants to increase, and says Rauner will decrease under his budget plans. Quinn did say that about the neighborhood recovery initiative. He saw in his administration that it was going badly, and then they changed it. They ripped it away from the agency that had it, and it went from from the juvenile justice to a couple different agencies within his administration.
I did something really stupid, and I tried not to unstupid it, but it was too stupid to unstupid is really what that leads to.
All right.
But one thing I would say, I think that Rauner should be a little careful in terms of trying to tie Quinn to Blagojevich. Blagojevich, I mean, I don't think anybody really believes that Quinn belongs in the same ballpark as a Blagojevich. And so if you keep making those comparisons, if you keep doing it too much, I think it comes off as trying too hard, being a little too shrill. I think that he needs to be a little careful how he negotiates that. Then again, it's a bare knuckle sport that we're engaged in here.
Indeed. Also on the IDOT situation, Republican members of Congress, U.S. Senator Mark Kirk, and then Republican congressmen, including Rodney Davis and Aaron Schock, put out a letter and let us know through press release to the U.S. Department of Transportation Inspector General, saying, well, if wrongful hires were made in Illinois with federal stimulus money, you should check into that. So they're getting into the act, and they say it's just doing their job, but it also, of course, helps the Republican candidate for governor at this point.
Let's not think that Aaron Schock's going to go out on any limb to help Bruce Rauner, too. Let's remember.
Well, that's true.
Is Dick Durbin going to go out on any limbs to help Quinn? Is there going to be any counter, or is he just going to let him twist? We'll see.
We shall see. Okay. Bruce Rauner did come to Springfield in the last several days, and they had rented a warehouse in kind of the near south side of downtown of Springfield, because they were filing petitions for the other campaign Bruce Rauner has been running in addition to his own, but kind of helping his own. For term limits. For a constitutional amendment which would create 8-year term limits for all members of the legislature. It would also make some other changes, trying to pass constitutional muster It would make it more difficult to override a governor's veto. It would slightly increase the number of members of the Illinois House to 123, I think, from 118, and reduce numbers of people in the Senate from 59 to 41, which would create some big downstate districts in rural territory. And they had a 36-foot long bound petition of like, I think it was 590,000 signatures and 1,600 pounds, and they made a big deal of trucking it over to the State Board of Elections because under state law it has to be bound all in one thing. First of all, do we think it will get on the ballot, and do we think it will pass? Because obviously there are some people who think it's a bad idea to limit the opportunity for people to continue to elect their representatives and senators.
My money is that it doesn't make it on the ballot. I think that, I think that the courts are going to remove that. They've done this in terms of changing the size of the legislature. That's somewhat window dressing, I think, to try to say, oh, this isn't really about changing, what's the term they use, structure, or structure and function.
That's what our Constitution
allows.
Right,
exactly. I mean, it didn't make it last time. I don't see any reason it's going to make it this time. So, I mean, it remains to be seen. If it does get on the ballot, it passes. And the reason why I think that it passes is, well, look at Mike Madigan, for example. I mean, there was a thing I saw recently. His approval ratings are dead low. And I think that there's a certain amount of voter fatigue with quote-unquote business as usual in Illinois. How do you fix this state? There was something that came out also recently that something like 50% of the people who live in Illinois would move if they could, those sorts of things. And so I think that there's a certain fatigue with the way the government has gone on in Illinois. I think it's blamed on backroom dealings and folks being there longer than they should. And so I think it would pass.
I agree I agree with Bruce 100%. It would pass, but I don't think it makes it just because they're going to roadblock it to death. And a lot of people in Springfield who I talk to who are part of the current establishment and the anti-term limits crowd is, well, just think of how bad things will get and how the lobbyists will take control and blah, blah, blah. It's like, you mean that's not already happening now?
Well, yeah, except, and I asked Bruce Rauner this question, won't staff members and lobbyists who are there forever really have more control? And he of course is like, well, incumbency is so strong that you need a way to, end that advantage. I don't know, some of the most effective legislators that I see are the ones who have been there longer than 8 years, so it is what it is. But, when it kind of depends if the court will block it and if the adequate grounds can be found. There's already been a lawsuit against that. Well, let's talk, first of all, there's a lawsuit against a couple of things that were filed, because also filed this week was the Fair Map Plan, which is also way more than the 300,000 signatures necessary. And this is a plan that would say redistricting, like after the next census, should be done not by the legislature per se, but by a nonpartisan commission. And there's a whole page full of rules and regulations that go with this actual constitutional amendment. And so they're trying to get that on the ballot too, and that and the term limits petitions are already being challenged in court, and the lawyer for that is Michael Casper, who has long worked for Michael Madigan, and I think is still counsel to Illinois Democratic Party, and Madigan is, of course, party chairman. So do we think that one also, the Fair Map Plan, will make it to the ballot, or will that not?
No, I don't think it's going to make it either. I think they'll I think they're going to do everything they can in order to stop it. I don't think it makes it either.
And if it does make it to the ballot, and let's say that it does pass, I don't see how anything's really changed. I mean, how do you make a commission in Illinois nonpartisan for anything? I mean, it would be as nonpartisan, for example, as, say, the Springfield City Council. How nonpartisan is that, even though it's officially nonpartisan? So, I mean, there's models for this sort of thing where you do it by computers or something like that. Now, a computer, I would submit, is nonpartisan. But this sort of thing, I see it problematic just because there's human beings involved, and human beings in politics in Illinois do what human beings in politics in Illinois have always done.
Well, I will say, I mean, what they've done is they've got some really interesting rules in there. Like, if you are on that commission, you can't run for the legislature. I think it's for 10 years. So they're trying to add restrictions to make sure there's non-political people in there. So, but I agree that any appointment process is difficult because who does the appointing?
Well, one thing that I think this really helps Rauner no matter what happens, because I think especially it helps Rauner if this is challenged in court and folks don't get a vote on it. Folks want to vote on stuff like this. And if Rauner can say, look, these rascals at the Capitol don't want you to have a say, that plays into his hands. I think it really helps him quite a bit. So I think Rauner wins no matter what happens with these things.
And it's amazing that a guy who's got $1 gazillion comes across as the populist on this too. That's his big card, I think.
So I guess we're saying this was a good week for Rauner.
Yeah, I think it was.
Okay, I mean, interestingly, and as the legislature moves toward its end of May deadline, the question is, the drumbeat from the Quinn administration is we need to extend the temporary income tax. Therefore, we'll have adequate programs. We can give more to education. As when he had these students outside his office this week telling how grants help them so much, and that Rauner, the budget he wants to do by ending the tax, will have to cut so many positions. So we'll lose, I think it was 20,000 of these grants to college students. All the agencies are saying what they will lose. Can Quinn win that battle over time, or can that be put in terms that people will accept?
Well, I mean, a tax increase is never helpful to an incumbent. I don't know how damaging this thing's going to be because the tax increases, we're 3 years into it. I don't see that the sky has fallen anywhere. And in fact, you can point to the positive of it. It's really helped the state's finances. The state is in much better fiscal shape since that tax increase. You can actually point to something that it's done. And so I don't see it as being a doomsday sort of thing at all. I think it's by the time November comes around, it's going to be something. Yeah, there's going to be some folks that are going to be up in arms about it, but those are the sorts of voters that probably were never going to be in.
And the other thing is we haven't seen Rauner's plan yet for how you fill the hole. I mean, he's talked to business groups in Springfield this week and was talking about, you can't tax you out of this, you have to have a better business climate. But how quickly can business build up to create more taxpayers to fill billions of dollars in lost revenue that will fall off, in 2015 if the tax is not extended? So it's a difficult situation.
When we've lost so many businesses and so many people already over the last few years. And just to touch on the income tax real quick, I think there is still a play here is the fact that this was, of course, touted as a temporary tax, even though probably everybody who heard it 3 years ago knew it wasn't going to be a temporary tax. And it still leaves a bad taste in their mouth and just makes them think that, look, see, we were right, we're cynical, you sons of blanks did this to us again, shame on us for believing you.
Bernie, I wouldn't be surprised if this is something that Rauner just takes a pass on. I mean, because if he does win, then he's going to have to be in that difficult position of, okay, now what do? You do have
Well, he is definitely saying, in fact, he used the words good grief a couple times at the speech I saw. We can't tax our way out of this, and he means extending the tax. He's definitely for ending it. Mm-hmm. So we'll see
what happens in October. It's May now.
That's true. Legislature, and Bob, you said this is an issue perhaps in Quincy or your territory about fire staffing, where there's been a bill before the legislature which would say that it is something that should be bargained with firefighters city by city to determine how many firefighters should be on a rig. Minimum. Tell us what's the situation.
The state basically wants to make mandatory staffing levels for local fire departments, taking the decision out of the hands of city councils and out of the hands of the fire chiefs as well. In Quincy, we've got a situation where the contract, it was a 1-year contract where firefighters got a 1% raise, and the city council rejected it. City council rejected it because they wanted a longer deal and they want to close the fire station. They want to eliminate some firefighters' positions. But they are in the middle of negotiating this, and one of the reasons the council members said they defeated it was because of this looming legislation. Well, I contend that if you get this contract locked in and take care of it beforehand, I would think there should be nothing the state could do to make you raise those levels, but silly me, we are in Illinois.
This is another example, I think, of a piece of legislation that just has as a true head scratcher about if something like this can pass in Illinois, then why bother having local governments? I mean, what's the need for a mayor or a city council if decisions like this that are going to be funded by local taxpayers are decided by the state? That's to me at least, I think it's outrageous. And we've had the same sort of issues about minimum manning levels here in Springfield a couple, 3 years ago, and it led to an unfair labor complaint, I believe, by the Springfield Fire Union, alleging the city had illegally or unfairly cut the number of firefighters. These are battles that need to be fought in each different area of because no, it can't be a one-size-fits-all solution.
Well, there are, I mean, a lot of the laws that apply to police and fire pensions do come out of Springfield and are imposed on cities, and the cities have to pay those full costs so they don't get behind, but it's eating into these budgets so that you've had mayors and former late Mayor Davlin of Springfield, Mayor Houston, they have talked about the need for reform of some of the pension rules that apply to cities that come out of state government, and they're trying to do that again this year, partly because Chicago is having a big pension problem, and legislators are trying to ease the burden up there through passing legislation.
What I find kind of curious or ironic is that when the Policy Institute came out with its study saying, hey, these pension costs are really going to harm municipalities, they were lambasted by some of these.
They used figures that
used
were not accurate. They were mixing city water, light, and power, which is run on electric and water bills, with the
Fair
city's
enough.
general funds, which are from property taxes and sales taxes.
You're right about that, but the thrust of the message, I mean, most folks probably didn't get into the minutia that we do, but the main point was this is an issue that needs to be addressed, and they were attacked vociferously by the same folks now who are now going to the legislature saying, geez, we need to do something about this.
Yeah, again, the Policy Institute has an agenda.
Of course they do.
And
of course
they don't like public employees getting pensions beyond 401ks generally, so they are using this as an example. And it would be better to have correct figures when you go before a city council.
I wouldn't disagree with that, but
still, the fact, like I say, Quincy, for example, the police and fire pension burden is roughly equates to about 50% of the annual police and fire budget. It's a huge number right now.
Understood.
yeah, and at some point, frankly, how many folks in America these days who work in the private sector have pensions? I mean, very, very, very few. And it's going to happen, in my view, not just in Illinois, but nationwide. At some point, the electorate that doesn't have these pensions is going to demand that public employees live under the same rules that the private sector does.
And I don't think anybody's begrudging just a pension per se, but to get 75% and retire at age 50 at 75% of your final salary, it's a bit of a Cadillac plan.
I think this is Bruce Rushton was talking about this a lot more before the primary than he is now, when he was talking about all of these union millionaires, which of course, if you talk to the state government union and the teachers unions, a lot of the people who are getting those pensions did it as a trade-off, and they don't get Social Security like people in the private sector do, in addition to whatever other plans they have. So obviously, it will be a continuing debate where we go. The progressive tax. By the way, Senator Don Harmon from Oak Park and Representative Christian Mitchell, I believe from Chicago, they had been trying to push a constitutional amendment for a progressive income tax in Illinois, which many states have, but Illinois does not. We have a flat income tax. They say if you make more, you should pay more, and there was some question about numbers as to, at what level of income this would actually cause you to pay more. But that went down. They didn't have enough votes to call it for a vote in the Senate, so that's been an issue that's gotten some play, but seems dead for the year.
For the year, I suspect it'll come back at some point, but not in the near future.
And now I'll open up something that Bruce is just going to pounce on, but now there have been 2 committee votes in the House for $100 million for an Obama presidential library to help lure it to Illinois. House Speaker Michael Madigan says that, government paid, it was more than $100 million combined, I know, state and federal, to bring to build the Abraham Lincoln Presidential Library and Museum in Springfield. Of course, Abraham Lincoln is no longer around to raise his own money. So I don't know if this will end up passing the full legislature. And we also saw State Senator Bill Brady of Bloomington propose, I think, an income tax checkoff so that the people would have a way to donate to a presidential library, but not doing it this way through appropriation this year in tough economic times. Will this pass, and should it pass?
Well, I don't know whether, I'm not going to predict whether it will pass. It shouldn't pass. In my view, this is scandalous is too strong of a word. But let's be clear here. $100 million doesn't mean anything to the federal government. I mean, that's pocket change.
Federal money is not usually used for
and that's
presidential
which is the
libraries.
next point. I mean, if this were to happen, it would be, I think, only the second time, or excuse me, the first time that some state has said we'll pay $100 million or the construction cost for a presidential library. It's never happened before. And isn't it interesting that it's happening in an election year? Isn't it interesting that it's happening as Quinn and Rauner it's shaping up to be not just a gimme for Quinn up in Cook County. Rauner's got some strength there. Isn't it curious that this is happening while that sort of a gubernatorial race is shaping up? It's like pulling something completely unexpected out of a magician's hat, and for what? And you know, it would be one thing, I think, if the state of Illinois was awash in cash. I mean, we're not even close to awash in cash. And so this is like getting a car, you know, pick whatever car you want, and saying, well, in addition to all the options, I'm going to have a diamond-studded sunroof or something. I mean, there's no need for this money from the state. I mean, I would think, frankly, that the library is going to come to Illinois anyway. I mean, the only other real option I would suspect would be Hawaii, perhaps. Those are where his connections are, and you know, Hawaii is a nice. No, I'm not. You know, but I would think that for scholars, and scholars do use these sorts of things, it's much easier to come someplace in the center of the country to do research, that you're going to get more people likely visiting it. It makes an abundant amount of sense to put it in Illinois, regardless of who pays for it. And so for the state to offer this up, I might be able to stomach it if the federal government said, well, you know, this is the tipping point. If you can give us a little bit of money, then we'll do it. But to dangle it out, you know, like this proverbial carrot before this, with no request from the federal government or anybody else.
Again, it's really the Obama Commission that he has set up. Anyway.
Well, the problem with Obama, of course, is that he can't raise any money on his own. I mean, come on.
Yeah, a guy who raises $1 billion
Yeah.
can raise $100 million for his own library. If the state wants to give him some land for it,
Sure.
I'm fine with
Yeah,
that. The Thompson Center, here you go, turn it into a library. Done.
Yeah, no, good point. I mean, yeah.
You mean the spaceship? Yeah.
There you go.
Kind of a sad note, and it might have been discussed on a previous show, but State Representative Keith Farnham, former state representative, was in court in Chicago this week. He recently resigned. He said it was for health issues. He showed up in court in Chicago with an oxygen tank that he was carrying with him, and he's been charged with child porn. Not good for the legislature. He was not a very prominent legislator when he was here. He is a Democrat, not particularly happy at this point. So
one thing about that I was impressed by is a fairly short amount of time, I think, passed from the service of the search warrants to the charges. Typically, a lot more time will pass, and so I don't know what explains that. That's kind of a head scratcher for me. But you know, it really should have come as no surprise to anybody, because when ICE and Customs serve a search warrant, those are the two folks that are in charge of this sort of area of law. So it's. Yeah.
And sadly, we're becoming numb to such things in the state of Illinois.
Well, it's unfortunate, and he is from Elgin. Anyway, Bob Gough, Bruce Rushton, thanks for your conversation. I'm Bernie Schoenburg, and thank you for watching. We'll see you next time on Capitol View.